I remember staring out the living room window, watching fat snowflakes drift down in the orange glow of the streetlight. The silence outside was almost comforting, a blanket of quiet. My parents were visiting my aunt in the next state over, leaving me to house sit. I was 24, freshly graduated, and relishing the solitude. It felt good, like I was proving something to myself. The power outage hit around 7 p.m. I was halfway through reheating some leftover pasta when the kitchen lights flickered, then died. Just like that, the hum of the refrigerator stopped, and the house plunged into an unnatural stillness. I stood there for a moment, waiting, half expecting everything to snap back on. It didn't. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to navigate the familiar hallways. I knew where the emergency candles were. Mom always kept them in the hallway closet. As I lit one, the flickering glow threw long shadows across the walls. Familiar furniture morphed into strange, looming shapes. The snowstorm outside intensified, wind battering against the windows. I tried to convince myself it was just a regular night, just a regular storm. I wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, but my nerves were already frayed. Every creak of the old house felt too loud, too deliberate. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was just a branch against the window, but it sounded too intentional. I muted my phone and listened. The sound came again from the back of the house. It's nothing, I told myself, heart pounding, just the wind. But then there was a thud, louder this time. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. I stood, candle in hand, and made my way to the kitchen. The back door loomed ahead, barely visible in the dim light. I checked the lock. Secure. But as I turned back, something caught my eye. Wet footprints on the kitchen floor, leading from the door to the hallway. My breath hitched. I hadn't noticed them before. Panic surged through me. Someone had been inside, or maybe still was. I strained to hear any sound, any movement. The house was silent, but it felt like the walls were holding their breath. I grabbed a heavy frying pan from the stove, my hands shaking. The candlelight flickered, and shadows danced along the walls. I moved down the hallway, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. The silence was thick, pressing in on me from all sides. Then I heard a soft scrape from the living room. I froze. It was barely audible, but enough. I turned the corner slowly, peeking into the room. A man stood by the window, back turned to me. He was thin, wearing a tattered coat, his head moving in quick, erratic twitches. I could see the muscles in his neck tense, relax, tense again. I didn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to listen. He turned his head slightly, and I saw his profile. Sunken eyes, wild and unfocused, lips moving like he was talking to himself. Drugs, I realized. He's probably strung out. He took a step towards the hallway, and I backed away, careful not to make a sound. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. I slipped into the laundry room, pressing my back against the wall. I clutched the frying pan, my fingers numb. The minutes stretched, each one an eternity. I heard his footsteps, uneven and heavy, moving through the house. He muttered something I couldn't understand, words slurring together. I thought about calling 911, but I knew the storm had knocked out the cell tower earlier. I'd checked when the power first went out. The landline was dead too. I was on my own. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a whisper, so close, I felt it more than heard it. "Where are you?" the voice said. I bit my lip to keep from making any sound. He was right outside the laundry room. I could hear his ragged breathing, the soft shuffle of his feet. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness between us. He moved away, but I didn't relax. I waited, counting seconds in my head. 1, 10, 20. Then I heard the back door open, the wind rushing in, footsteps crunching in the snow. I stayed there, huddled in the dark, listening. I don't know how long I waited. Eventually, I crept out, heart still hammering. The back door was wide open, snow swirling in. I closed and locked it, my hands trembling. I checked the house. Every room, every closet, empty. He was gone. But the fear didn't leave. I kept hearing sounds, soft taps, creaks, whispers. I told myself it was the house settling, the wind, my own imagination. But that didn't stop me from jumping at every shadow. When my parents came home the next morning, I didn't tell them. What would I say? They'd think it was a dream, a panic attack. Maybe it was. Maybe he never really came back inside. But sometimes, on snowy nights, I still hear footsteps outside. Always just quiet enough to wonder if I imagined it. It was the kind of cold that made you feel brittle, the snow crunching beneath my boots like breaking glass. I pulled my scarf tighter, cursing myself for leaving the Christmas party early. But crowded rooms always made me anxious, especially when the chatter turned into a blur of clinking glasses and forced laughter. Home felt safer, at least it used to. The walk back through the suburban streets was supposed to be peaceful. Twinkling lights hung from houses like lifelines, each glowing window a small, warm world. My breath fogged the air, my footsteps the only sound except for the distant hum of traffic. Then I heard it, a second pair of footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Or maybe someone else was heading home too. I quickened my pace, telling myself not to look back. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it wasn't real. But the crunching behind me grew louder, matching my steps. I turned a corner onto Willow Lane, a longer stretch of road lined with towering oaks now skeletal and white with frost. My heart pounded as I glanced over my shoulder. There, about 20 yards back, was a figure. A man, maybe mid-30s, his dark coat blended with the night. But the pale skin of his face caught the glow of a street lamp. He was staring right at me. I kept walking, faster now, my mind racing. He's just walking. Maybe he lives nearby, but I knew better. His eyes had a kind of hollow intensity, too fixed, too focused. I'd seen people strung out like that downtown, eyes wide, movements jagged, like their own bodies surprised them. I reached for my phone, my fingers stiff with cold. No signal. Typical. I stuffed it back in my pocket, deciding to try a different tactic. I crossed the street, stepping over the snowbank onto the opposite sidewalk. Maybe he'd get the hint. He crossed too. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Not yet. Running meant admitting I was prey. I kept walking, my ears straining for any sound. The neighborhood felt too quiet. Most houses were dark, everyone asleep, blissfully unaware of the shadow stalking their streets. I approached the next intersection, spotting a gas station on the corner. Its flickering neon sign was like a beacon. I could go in, call for help, wait there until he left. I practically ran across the icy road, my boots slipping slightly, my breath sharp in my chest. But as I reached the door, I saw the closed sign hung up. The lights were on, but the place was empty. The clerk probably off for the holiday. I pounded on the glass anyway, yelling. No one came. I turned around. He was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. The pale glow of his eyes locked onto mine. He smiled, lips cracking, teeth bared. He spoke to me in a somber, eerie voice. It's a cold, very cold night, isn't it? His voice was hoarse like it hadn't been used in a while. Stay away from me, I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice shook. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. Just want to talk. A pretty girl like you shouldn't seem lonely. I backed up against the door, my hand searching for something, anything, to defend myself. There was nothing. I'll scream, I warned. He grinned wider. Go ahead, no one's listening, he said in a threatening but somber tone. He was right. The street was empty. The houses might as well have been miles away. And even if someone did hear, would they come? Or would they close their curtains and go back to sleep, pretending they didn't? Suddenly, I bolted. I didn't care if running made me look weak. I sprinted down the street, my boots slipping, snow spraying up around me. I heard him behind me, his footsteps heavier, faster, closer. My house was 5 blocks away. I could make it. I had to. I cut through yards, leaping over fences, barely feeling the cold now. I reached my street, heart pounding in my ears. My house was the second on the left, lights still on. I could see the Christmas tree through the window, its soft glow almost mocking. I stumbled up the steps, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I glanced back. He was standing at the end of my driveway, watching. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and pressed my back against it, panting. Silence. I waited, every nerve on edge, listening. Then came the knock. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Another knock, harder this time. Then his voice, muffled through the door. "You can't hide in there forever." I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and tried to call 911. I couldn't make the call, my phone had died. I stared at the screen, willing it to work. Nothing. The knocking stopped. I crept to the window, peeking out through the edge of the curtain. The driveway was empty. The street was empty. But I knew he was still there, somewhere. I checked every lock, every window. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, each creak of the floorboards a footstep. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, my back to the wall, waiting. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real. My mind raced with every possibility. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd left. Or maybe he was inside. I forced myself to move, checking each room, every closet. Nothing. But the back door, it was unlocked. I stared at it, the knife gripped tight. Had I forgotten to lock it? I was sure I had. Suddenly, a noise from upstairs, a floorboard creaking. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to. I climbed the stairs, each step a struggle. The hallway was dark, the doors all closed. I reached the last door, my room. The door was slightly open. I pushed it slowly, heart in my throat. The room was empty, but the window was wide open. Snow was blowing in, coating the floor, and on the windowsill, a footprint, not mine. I closed the window, locked it, and backed out of the room. My breath came in shallow gasps. He'd been here. He could still be here. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, the knife in my lap, waiting for dawn, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. When the sun finally rose, the world outside looked different. The snow was pristine, untouched. No footprints, no sign that anything had happened. But I knew, and so did he. I haven't seen him since. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I hear footsteps outside. Just one set, crunching in the snow. And I wonder if he's still waiting for the right time. It was Christmas Eve, the snow falling thick and heavy, blanketing the suburban streets in a quiet menace. I was 23, saving up for college classes, stuck delivering pizzas while everyone else celebrated. The shift had been mostly normal. Cold hands, wet shoes, awkward smiles at families that reminded me of my own. Then the last order of the night came in. It was an odd address, an address I didn't recognize. To be honest, I thought it might have been fake at first. Regardless, I went out to deliver the order anyway. Pulling up to the house, something immediately felt wrong. The street was too quiet, the snow untouched by tire tracks or footprints. The house itself loomed in the glow of my headlights, a hulking, shadowed thing with boarded-up windows and a yard that had been untended for years. Dead weeds poked through the snow like bones. The order had been paid online, but the note said, "Walk into the house. No instructions for a tip. No lights on inside." Looking back, I should have just left at this point, but I was really needing the money. I grabbed the pizza, braced against the biting wind, and crunched my way to the porch. The front door was ajar, just a crack, swaying slightly in the wind. I knocked anyway, the sound muffled by the snow and silence. "Hello? Pizza delivery ... My voice felt small, swallowed by the emptiness. No response. I left the box on the stoop and turned back toward the car, heart pounding. But as I reached the bottom step, I heard it. Movement inside. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone dragging their feet. I froze, breath fogging in front of me. Then, from inside, a whisper, "Wait, you were supposed to come inside." I spun around. The door had swung wider, revealing darkness that seemed to stretch forever. Something shifted just out of sight. A shadow within shadows. I backed up slowly. "I'm not coming in. You have your pizza. Have a good night." I tried to sound firm, but my voice wavered. No answer. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement at an upstairs window. A face, just for a second. Pale, eyes wide and empty, then gone. Instinct screamed at me to leave. I stumbled back to the car, fumbling for my keys. But before I could get in, a figure appeared on the sidewalk. A man, thin, gaunt, his clothes hanging loose. He walked toward me, movements jerky and unpredictable. His eyes, wild, unfocused, locked onto mine. "Cold night," he slurred, his voice carrying over the snow. "Got a light?" I don't smoke." I tried to sound calm, tried to assess if he was a threat or just some lost soul. He laughed. A dry, hollow sound. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. Something in the way he said it, the quiet intensity, made my blood run cold. I got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The man just stood there, watching. I was about to drive away when I saw it through the rearview mirror. Another shadow in the window. This one holding something. A glint of metal. A knife. My breath caught. The man on the sidewalk saw me looking and smiled, showing teeth too white, too sharp. He started walking toward the house, his gait shifting, more purposeful. The front door opened wider, inviting him in. I couldn't just leave. Someone was in there. Someone who needed help. My hand hovered over my phone. Call the cops? But what would I say? I saw a weird guy and a knife? Then I spotted movement at the side of the house, another figure slipping around to the back. I couldn't stay. I knew that much. But as I pulled away, I saw a woman on the corner. I rolled down my window, desperate for another sane presence. "Hey, something's wrong at that house." She looked at me, blank, too blank, like I was the dumbest person in the world. "What house?" she asked, her voice thin, almost mechanical. I turned back, pointing at the house I just came from. I realized in the middle of doing this that it was pointless and that I should just leave. So I did exactly that. I slammed my foot on the gas and didn't look back. That night, I didn't sleep, kept replaying it over and over. The knife, the laughter, the shifting reality of the house. I reported the address to the cops the next day. They found nothing unusual, just an abandoned home, empty for years. And sometimes, late at night when the snow falls just right, I swear I see a shadow in my rearview, watching, waiting.